Hello, this is Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace, and I stopped by a table here, Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, speaking with Cody Urban. And Cody, you want to tell us a little bit about this organization? What is it?
So the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers is a coalition of different organizations, whether that's human rights organizations, labor orgs, faith-based orgs, any organization doing its own work in its own sphere, but we come together for one reason, and that is to support the rights, welfare, and dignity of seafarers. And so seafarers are often the invisible workers that we don't see working on the many cargo ships that are coming day in, day out of our ports. It's also the workers who are working on the cruise ships as either cooks, cleaners, even entertainers for tourists paying like thousands of dollars with workers who hardly make enough to even send home to their families.
So you were telling me a story about a Filipino worker there and his family and how far along he's been on the ship, not even able to see him. So could you talk about that story?
Sure, and to kind of set the context for that, you will rarely see an actual like U.S.-based seafarer, cargo worker, what we often know of as like the merchant marines. The global economy is changed so much in the last few decades, and so the vast amount of seafarers are actually from countries like the Philippines or China or Indonesia or India, countries where there's already such a unfair disadvantage because of unfair trade and foreign policy that has made these countries kept them impoverished because of monopoly corporations' interests. And so it's from these countries that the vast majority of seafarers come from. And so just yesterday we were going on a ship at the Port of Portland to help give vaccinations to these ships, because the shipping companies and the home governments are not pushing hard to get these seafarers vaccinated. It's communities that have to come together, and it shouldn't have to be us, but for as long as it is, we'll be there. And this one Filipino seafarer was saying, we asked him how long he's been on the ship, and he said about 14 months since going home. And we asked him about his family.
Plane going over, just let that go.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
So we asked the seafarer, he said, how long you been on the ship? And he said about 14 months. And we asked about his family. He said, yeah, I have a wife and a son in Manila. My son is about to be 1 year old. And I paused a bit and I thought, and then I realized that he's never met his son. His son was born after he left, and his son is about to turn 1 year old, and he has never met his 1 year old son. And the pandemic has pushed the contracts for these crews so much longer than they should be. But even before that, could be unfathomable for so much of us in the U.S.
So how is your organization helping? And are they organizing the people there, or are you working for unions, or what's going on?
So our vision, our vision statement is unity between land and sea, and communities in solidarity with seafarers. And so we do community organizing, but we're organizing people on land around the port cities so that they can understand the issues of seafarers. And in that small window, when seafarers are here, when there's a ship that needs to be unloaded or onloaded, and there's just enough time to get on that ship, we have a community here organized that has care packages put together with toiletries, snacks, information about their rights, and as well as connections to our organization they can follow up with over Facebook or the internet. So when they're on sea, they can let us know what their conditions are like. And so we deliver these care packages. We also have been working with grants we've been getting from the health department to try to give vaccinations. And our coalition members have worked to give about 2,000 vaccinations between Portland and Vancouver since we started that program. We want to do much more, and we need community members, ready on land to, help receive seafarers as we're going to do that work. And
well, how can people join you and support you on this?
People can find us on Facebook, Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, and follow us there. Get in touch with us. We would love to talk about how we can help. In addition to providing these much-needed services, these services shouldn't be needed. This is a systematic issue, and the system needs to be changed. So ultimately, what we want to organize for is we want to organize to get out the voices of seafarers who are kept invisible, so we know, and then bring the heat to the home governments, to our own government to give support, and ultimately, need to hold these companies accountable. And I do think that, City of Portland, the City of Vancouver, if Customs and Border Patrol makes it hard for these seafarers to disembark even for a bit to get vaccinated, we need to let them know that this is a human rights issue and that should not be a difficulty.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about seafarers, you're also talking about ships that are bringing cargo from all over the world. You have captains and flags from different countries. How does that work for, where you're trying to help people, but you got various countries in competition, different regulations and rules by those countries?
It's a really interesting situation. There's something that is referred to as a flag of convenience, where a shipping company will register their ship in a different country because they'll find the countries with the lowest labor standards possible. So for example, you'll often see a ship that has a Panamanian flag. And that company could be based in the US or Germany or Japan, but it's registered in Panama because of its low labor standards, and it's easier to crack down on seafarers' attempts to unionize. And so we shouldn't be fooled by the flag we see on those ships. The key part is to know is that the seafarers themselves are coming from countries whose governments are often not doing much to protect their rights. And again, our government is not doing much to hold them accountable. And so I think the most important thing is always to push for, right now definitely full vaccination access. But really, seafarers want to go home. These ships are like prisons for them during the pandemic, and even outside the pandemic. The International Transportation Federation has referred to their case as modern-day slavery. And so their home governments should hear their voices and repatriate their workers.
Now, it reminds me of something, that I think of, the ship's captain as sort of a nation, and where you have a king, and the king runs the whole ship. Corporations kind of run that way, where you don't have rights like you would as a citizen in places. Corporations run from CEOs and owners from the top down. Ships are kind of run the same way, and it just all seems like a system that's unfair to workers all around. So how do we, you have to have somebody who can actually navigate a ship, can be in charge of certain things, make things happen. But how do we reach out to those captains on those ships and their responsibility to take care of their workers?
Well, luckily, there's another plane flying overhead.
Yeah.
Again, we're a port city. That includes the airport.
Yeah.
a lot of exploited workers at those airports too.
9/11 too.
Exactly. So we've had the fighter jets flying over to remind us how we should be practicing our patriotism, I guess.
I guess. Okay.
But I think on that note, we're lucky to have inspectors with the International Transportation Federation, the ITF, as members of our coalition. So the Columbia River ITF inspector, their job is to hold the companies accountable, and their job is to, they have legal access to come onto a ship, to reach out to the authorities in different countries when the captains are holding back wages or holding back, safe drinking water. And so I think it's about what each of our organizations can provide, and that is something that the ITF has been crucial in providing. And so I think that it again speaks to us being a coalition of different organizations who are able to play a role in that.
So do the captains actually, through corruption, actually withhold wages for themselves to profit from versus the company that they're working for? Does that happen?
There's a variety of different ways that the captains will either hold back wages or sometimes enact violence. You know, we have heard stories of seafarers standing up for their rights out in the open seas. And, you know, this is told to us through whispers by seafarers because they don't want to, you know, they don't want themselves to be heard talking about what's really going on. Because sometimes captains will literally throw seafarers overboard and mark it as an accident. And those are actual stories that we have heard about. And so I think that, you know, while there is a variety of ways that the captains can, you know, really illegally and inhumanely assert power over these workers, the companies need to hold them accountable. The companies purposefully turn a blind eye to this violence happening out in the lawless ocean. And the companies lobby to lower international labor regulations. And like we said with flags of convenience, they will register in the easiest countries to avoid that standard. And so while we see these captains doing these actions, the companies must be held accountable, and the home governments of these seafarers need to stand up for their citizens.
So you mentioned the Coast Guard before. So how are they involved in this in any way?
Well, we actually haven't worked with the Coast Guard that much. The ITF is more who we work with because, you know, they're given...
That's an acronym, so what's it stand
yes,
for?
the International Transportation Federation.
Okay. From
before I was mentioning. And so we work with them when it comes to holding the captains and the companies accountable. Our coalition has not worked much with the Coast Guard, though.
Okay, well, what I'm curious about is how we as veterans can support and make sure that these people are being held accountable. Because, you know, many people in the military served in the Navy. Mm-hmm. They know what it's like to serve on a ship and under a captain, and the responsibilities the captains have to their crew. Yeah. So I think that's something we should try and reach out to these Navy veterans and let them know what's going on.
And you know, some of the most profound conversations about this I've had with, you know, either acting or former or Navy veterans. Because like you said, Dan, they understand it. You know, usually we'll go through like a general kind of spiel or talking points about our coalition when we're meeting new people. And part of it is talking about the harsh conditions that seafarers go through. Now, when I talk about the long working hours and the long time being at sea, away from home, you know, many, you know, former acting naval members express empathy, and they say, like, if anything, like, you know, that is hard, but they have this kind of unique respect for seafarers who they also can recognize that seafarers, despite all this exploitation, seafarers are proud of the work that they do. Just as much as many, like the naval service men and women, were very proud of the work that they did. And that pride is a point of solidarity that's so natural. But then the part where there's no longer something to be proud of is the exploitation. Like when they hear about the lack of clean drinking water, when they hear about the moldy food in the fridges, when they hear about the wage theft, and yes, even the murder, that's when that same like pride and solidarity of a fellow worker on the seas turns into that rage. And so I think that how we can work together is taking that outrage that we feel and channeling it to action to, one, help provide these services to the seafarers, but in the bigger picture, we have to work together and as one voice, you know, raise the voices of the seafarers themselves and demand justice that they're not able to hear from. And I think that we want to work with veterans. We want veterans organizations, you know, to join our coalition if they're so inclined. We would love for Veterans for Peace to be a member of PCCS locally here. And so there's so much work we can do together.
Well, Cody, I'm really glad that I ran into you again. not seeing you for quite a while, almost since COVID. You know?
I know. Time is different these days.
Yeah, so it's good to run into you again. This is Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace, kind of doing a on-the-spot interview, and I'll put it up on YouTube for people to see later. Thanks again, buddy.
Awesome.
You
Thanks,
bet.
Al.